Hey guys, Puid189 here, and today this video is going to be a little bit different than the usual videos I make. Usually I script videos and I make series and different things like that, and don't worry, the new ones are coming. But this video is a little bit different because, one, it's going to be just a big rant about Durin's Bane, or the nameless Balrog that we see in Fellowship of the Ring. But before I do that, I'm just going to plug that this is going to be sort of like this is going to be a sample of what is going to happen after the new year, because after the new year I'm going to be a part of a new podcast called Magic Rings and Laser Beams, and it's going to be talking about the lore of different fantasy and sci-fi universes, and we're going to sometimes talk about movies and sometimes talk about various, nerdy things, and I'm going to do it with a few friends of mine. And I will give you all more information of that later, but at the moment, just wanted to make this video of this rant that I feel like no one really talks about. And it's about the Balrog. The Balrog that we see in Khazad-dûm, as we know as Durin's Bane. And his appearance, and the fact that he exists, leaves so many questions, leaves so many open ends, and there's so much to it for just his being there that boggles the mind. Now, Durin's Bane is probably my favorite entity of the enemy, and by enemy I don't even mean Sauron, I mean Morgoth. And the reason is because he's such a punk, and that's because he is, for one, most enemies in Tolkien's Legendarium have names. There are only a few that are known by titles given to them, but even the giant spider outside of Barad-dûr is called Shelob. Even she has a name. This Balrog, this is a nameless soldier of the enemy from a time immemorial. This Balrog, he's even called the Nameless Terror or the Nameless Fear in Mirkwood, and by Saruman, at least in the movie for Saruman. So he's not Gothmog, the captain of the Balrogs, and one of Morgoth's greatest servants. He's not. There was also another Balrog lord that was named. I forgot his name. He's not Sauron. He's not the lieutenant. He's literally a powerful foot soldier that was in Morgoth's army. And after the War of Wrath, he was one of the few Balrogs to survive, and he fled into Middle-earth over the Ered Luin and found the Misty Mountains, thought it was accommodating, and then delved deep into the stone because its cause had lost. Morgoth was taken away in chains, the elves and the Valar had succeeded, and the powers of Eru Ilúvatar overcame Morgoth. Well, it was mostly the Valinor that overcame Morgoth, because Eru Ilúvatar could have just snapped his fingers and Morgoth or Melkor would have been destroyed. But the point is that this is one of the few Balrogs that made it. And for one, I think that's extremely interesting to have a nameless soldier who was essentially, first off, Balrog are Maiar, and Maiar are like angels. They're like demigods, because there's Eru Ilúvatar, who is God, essentially Yahweh, and then there's the Valar, who are a part of the Ainur, and the Valar are like the undergods. They're what we would call pagan gods that follow the overgod, which is Eru Ilúvatar, which, like I said, is like our version of the Christian God or Jewish God or Yahweh. And then below the Valar are the Maiar, and the Maiar are their servants. They are great spirits of power and magic that are like angels. And during the War of Wrath, that was not overly special. It wasn't a common thing. It was much more common to have orcs and trolls and elves and men and dwarves and stuff like that. But in the War of Wrath, there was no shortage of Maiar on the front lines fighting, and particularly the Balrogs. There were some Maiar that stayed in the back, there were some that played supporting roles, Even some of them were more sheltered, like Olorin, which is the Meyer that becomes Gandalf. But a lot of them fought in the front lines, and all Balrogs did. So this Balrog is a Maiar that fought in close combat against elf lords, and he most likely killed a lot of important people in his time. But when they lost, he fled to Middle-earth, and this nameless foot soldier of the enemy found its way into Moria and slept there for 5,000 years until, the dwarves found it and awakened it because they were delving too deep to find more mithril. And this is when the Balrog gets his name, because he becomes Durin's Bane, because when the dwarves woke him up, he began to kill them, and he killed Durin the Sixth. And the reason why Durin is so important is because Durin the Deathless was the first dwarf of the Longbeards clan, and every Durin after him was supposed to be a resurrection or a reincarnation of that Durin, because they were all so alike to one another, and they were the greatest dwarves. And this Balrog slew Durin the Sixth as soon as it woke up in the initial attack. And this goes to show that this Balrog was very brave. All Balrogs are really brave because, as I said, they're frontline fighters, and though usually a dwarf can't stand up to it, this Balrog had no idea what it was dealing with. These dwarves could have had runic or magic weaponry from ages long past. These dwarves could have had a Silmaril and an axe. These dwarves could have had Valar aiding them. This Balrog awoke in a world 5,000 years later, and it knew nothing about it, and yet it still went on a rampage. Now, this Balrog spent about a year chasing the dwarves out of Khazad-dûm, and then it did something that people don't often think about, but that is chilling when you really think about it. And I'll get back to it more later, but the Balrog, after it chased all the dwarves out of Khazad-dûm, it didn't go back to sleep. And that's an extremely important thing to take note of. And that's really scary to think about, because the only reason why it wouldn't go back to sleep is because if it had something to do, if there was an agenda. And something you need to know about Balrogs, or Maiar, is that the Balrog, you should never think of it as a beast. Balrogs are fearsome Maiar, but Maiar are extremely intelligent. They're more intelligent than anything mortal in this day and age. If the Balrog ever felt like speaking, that Chronicles of Narnia meme where Aslan says, do not cite the old magic to me, which I was there when it was written. That is essentially the Balrog. This Balrog has seen everything. This Balrog was created before creation. It was made before time. It fought in the War of Wrath. It likely fought in the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. This Balrog rode a dragon into battle. This Balrog is unnamed, but the fact that it's alive and that it survived the War of Wrath, and the fact that it is of the ranks of the Balrog, means that it has probably slain so many heroes of the old world. And it's devious, and though it's aggressive and it's filled with hate and it's powerful, and there's another name for Balrog, which is Valukar, at least I think, I might need to check that again, but that means demon of might. So these Balrogs, they're supposed to be really strong frontline fighters, but they're extremely intelligent. And this is one reason why Tolkien is really brilliant, because he connects all these characters together. I feel like I'm ranting, but Tolkien was a very religious person, and he made everything seem like random acts of chance that God would do to make everything right again. And what was really weird, the weirdest thing that could have ever happened to this Balrog, happened when the Fellowship passed through Moria. Think of it from the Balrog's point of view. There is an adventuring party that happens to go through after it's killed a few colonies of dwarves, and after a bunch of goblins and trolls have begun to worship it, and it suddenly finds 9 members of an adventuring party passing through its realm. And this adventuring party is unique with 2 instances. One, the bearer of the ring is in it. And you need to realize that the Balrog would know who Sauron is. The Balrog, like Sauron would be the Balrog's old drinking buddy. They are of the same ranking in the cosmos. In fact, do you recall in the movie when the Balrog raised up and fire just engulfed it and it showed its true might to Gandalf? The Balrog, that is probably the best view you can see of an unleashed Maiar, of Sauron. That's probably the best view that you can get of Sauron. And what makes this Balrog such a punk is that because it's a Maiar, but it's of Morgoth's ilk, because it's a corrupted fire spirit, this Balrog gives no shits about the rules of the universe. And it is an unleashed Maiar. And unleashed Maiar have shattered continents. When the 5 wizards came to Middle-earth, they were forbidden by the powers to use all of their might and to take human guises and to not fight Sauron directly. Because at the end of the day, Sauron, while they were here to guide Middle-earth, Sauron was the problem of the mortals. So that's why Gandalf never just walked up to Barad-dûr and was just like, yo, Sauron want to throw down, because he wasn't allowed to. He couldn't. And in Moria, we see Gandalf actually be allowed for once to reveal his true might as well. In the books, when the Balrog and Gandalf first saw each other, after everyone went down some stairs, and Gandalf was the last one in the room, and the Balrog showed up, and Gandalf cast a spell at it, and the Balrog cast a counter spell that nearly overwhelmed Gandalf. And there were 2 simple spells, and the rocks around them cracked, and the room nearly caved in on itself. And that's it. It was just 2 initial spells, and rock shattered, and there were fissures, and that just shows the barest hint of power that both of these Maiar could unleash if they were allowed to. And Gandalf was only allowed to do it if he had to. He was only allowed to use his powers, because before then, the greatest thing Gandalf ever did was light some pine cones on fire and throw them at wargs when he was in a tree with some hobbits. That was the best he could do and what he was allowed to do. But this Balrog gives no shits about any of the universal cosmic rules. This Balrog could probably level the mountain that it was in, and it would have had no reason not to, other than, I have an agenda. And so not only does this Balrog run into this adventuring party that's trying to go and kill his old drinking buddy, but this Balrog also finds one of the few beings in all of Middle-earth that could perhaps challenge it in power anymore. Because this Balrog used to be a fair-sized fish in a lake, but now this Balrog is a big fish in a little pond. Nothing except Gandalf or Saruman, or it's even hard to say if Sauron could defeat this Balrog, because Sauron, it was Morgoth's lieutenant, but he was also fairly weak when it came to personal combat. Balrogs, as I said before, were frontline fighters. Sauron was better known for his sorcery and his cunning. Whenever he fought on the front lines, he almost always lost. Now, that's not saying that Sauron was a loser when it came to strength or anything like that, because he was still a Maiar. He could plow through men and elves and dwarves. But if Sauron ever fought like a great beast of old, or if he fought other Maiar, the reason why Sauron has survived so long is because he would use trickery and cunning, and he knew when to fold them. He knew when to run away. And it is arguable that once Sauron tricked the elves and men and created the One Ring, and once he put the One Ring on, that he became a much better combatant. But still, we never know that for certain. Sauron is much more powerful when it comes to magic rather than actual fighting. So it's hard to say who would win between Sauron and the Balrog, particularly if Sauron had the ring. Which is why I said earlier, when, the Balrog raises itself and shows its full might, and the flames just erupt from its being, that, like, you're pretty much looking at an unbridled Sauron at that moment. Like, this is Sauron unleashed. And this is a demon unleashed. This is not just like an up-jump troll or something. This is a eldritch abomination of legends. And yet at the same time, it's still just a foot soldier. It's still unnamed. But as I said, it not only stumbles upon the ring bearer, but one of the Maiar of Eru Ilúvatar's side. And the Balrog, to its credit, it doesn't run away, because it has not fought anything that could challenge it for 5,000 years. But instead, it actually attacks Gandalf. The Balrog didn't really care about the ring. The ring probably would have done nothing for the Balrog, really. The Balrog wouldn't care. Like, he'd be like, he'd be like, oh, Sauron, I know that guy. He owes me $12 or something like that. He wouldn't think like, oh, this ring is so powerful. The ring might have affected the Balrog a little bit because Gandalf was afraid of the ring. But Gandalf is also corruptible. The Balrog is no longer corruptible because he's already a corrupted Maiar. So likely he would not have needed the ring in the slightest. But he would have felt its power. He would have known, likely, that it had the sign of Sauron on it. But it didn't need it, and so it could have easily let the Fellowship, run away, go past it, but it didn't. It attacked. It actually fought an Istari, or, another Maiar, Gandalf, and Gandalf was allowed to use his full might. And when they fell off the bridge of Khazad-dûm, they were pretty evenly matched. It was when they went through the water that the Balrog's flames were quenched. And at the end of the day, the Balrog is a fire spirit. And the darkness that is, mingled with the flame, that's why it's, that's one telltale sign of how it's corrupted, that even fire can be dark. But, after it went through the water, and then, they chased each other up the stairs to the very top of the Misty Mountains and fought for 7 days, 7 nights, and they both just killed each other. And it shows the bravery and just the tenacity of this fucking unnamed Balrog. And it also shows the bravery of Gandalf, too, because Gandalf, this was likely the first time, or one of the first time, that Gandalf has ever actually fought another Maiar. Because Gandalf, who in his Maiar state known as Olorin, he was a sheltered Maiar. He was a Maiar of grief, actually. And he was... The one reason why he was chosen to go to Middle-earth was because he was scared of Sauron. He was never really a big fighter. It was only after he came to Middle-earth and he, palled around with mortals for about 3,000 years that he, lost some of his fear, and that he gained a lot of wisdom and worldly knowledge. And not to say Gandalf would be stupid, but, he'd be very wise, but he was actually considered the wisest when he came over by the elves. But he would have likely had not nearly as much experience. He might have fought in the War of Wrath and done quite a bit, but most likely he would not have fought as much as the Balrog. So the Balrog saw someone on his level playing field and thought, I'm gonna rumble with this guy. And Gandalf was probably like, oh god, this guy might be on my terms, but a Balrog is still a soldier of might. He's a shock trooper. He's still powerful in what he does. And Gandalf might have probably lost if they hadn't fallen into the water. The Balrog might have just slain Gandalf. But, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. The point is that something to think about is, what if the Fellowship of the Ring never went through Moria? What if the Balrog simply did not go after them? Or what if Gandalf led them through the Gap of Rohan? Or what if Gandalf hadn't have died there and he had not have fought the Balrog? That means the Balrog would have lived. And if the Balrog lived, think about it for a second. If Gandalf had stayed alive the Fellowship would never have broken, and he would have led the Fellowship to Mount Doom with his knowledge and his know-how and his powers, and he would have helped Frodo toss the ring into Mount Doom. And they would have likely succeeded in killing Sauron without as much of a hassle as everything else. And honestly, Boromir might still be alive as well. But once the Ring of Power was destroyed, imagine it's now 50 years after the War of the Ring. And, it could be 100 or 200 years, but let's go 50 years. Imagine 50 years after the War of the Ring, and a lot of the elves have left Middle-earth. Celeborn and Glorfindel and Galadriel took a ship to Valinor, and they decide to leave Middle-earth. And Gandalf goes with them. Saruman is defeated, Sauron is defeated, and there's no need for any great powers left in Middle-earth. And, you might ask me, like, what does elves have to do with it? But elves have... most Balrogs could take out a lot of elves, but there are some elf lords of old that have the power to face a Balrog in single combat. Glorfindel did, and he died in the attempt, and he was brought back just like Gandalf was. And there's a few other elf lords that might have had the power to face a Balrog, but 50 years after the War of the Ring ends, and most of the elves and their magic has left Middle-earth, the Elven Rings of Power and the Dwarven Rings of Power have now failed. Their power is no more. Gandalf leaves with them. And there is now nothing left in Middle-earth that is of the Eldar world, except this nameless Balrog that is hiding inside of Khazad-dûm. Imagine it's Middle-earth and there's peace in the world. And one day, 50 years after it's all over, this Balrog steps out into the summit of the Misty Mountains and overlooks this vast world that could not stop his onslaught. And he would have an army of goblins and orcs and trolls behind him to help him conquer. Because this Balrog stayed awake for a reason. This Balrog did not go to sleep. He gathered the orcs and the trolls, and he did not actively kill them. He allowed them to dwell. He did not allow dwarves to dwell in Khazad-dûm, but he allowed these things to dwell in there because they were evil beasts that worshipped it like a god. This Balrog is a wild card that has nothing to do with Sauron. It has nothing to do with the goodly powers. It is an ancient spirit of unmeasured intelligence and unbridled power. And if Gandalf had not killed it, this Balrog would have eventually left Khazad-dûm because it would not be content to stay in Khazad-dûm. There'd be no reason for it to stay there. It was not a beast that lurked. It was a spirit, a corrupted spirit, that followed Morgoth, that wished to corrupt others as it was corrupted. It was a Maiar of might and anger and hatred. And if Gandalf and the Elf Lords left, there would be nothing really left to stop it that's on its level. Now, you might think there might be a few little things, like maybe, and I'm being really optimistic here, but if it was 50 years after the War of the Ring, Aragorn would still be alive. He'd be in his 130s, I think, because he was 88 when he became King Elisar, or King of Gondor. And, he lived to be 189 years old because he was one of the Dunedain, a descendant of Númenor. And, Aragorn had Narsil, or Anduril, the Flame of the West, and it was made from the shards of Narsil, and Narsil cut the ring from Sauron. So Narsil was a magical sword that could hurt a Maiar. So, maybe, if the Balrog attacked, maybe, if Aragorn brought out the full might of Gondor's armies, and Rohan rode with him, it is possible that Aragorn could have at least wounded the Balrog in battle. Likely the Balrog would have killed Aragorn. In fact, I don't think there's really any chance that Aragorn could have defeated it in single combat. But Aragorn might have wounded it enough to make it flee, and maybe the Valar would have allowed Gandalf to come back to Middle-earth to face it, or something like that. Or maybe one of the old wizards that remained in Middle-earth, maybe Radagast, would finally take up the mantle of, wizard, and done what he should have done. Like, maybe the Balrog would have cut through his forests, or maybe the two blue wizards of the east would have come out of hiding and faced the Balrog. Perhaps they would have done it, but there's no guarantees. And I'm not really giving a lot of credit to, dwarven smithing. Maybe the dwarves would have made a weapon that could have slayed a Balrog after years and years of trying. I do not know. But what I do know is this. What is most likely that on that day, when the Balrog stepped out of Moria and oversaw the world at peace, it would have roared and summoned its armies, and it would have moved forward, because the Balrog is the closest thing to Sauron that we actually see in The Lord of the Rings. This foot soldier of the enemy would have been the only servant of Morgoth left, and it would have began dark cults, and it would have called forth the beasts that fled Mordor once Sauron was defeated. And the most likely outcome is that nothing could have stood in its way. Merry Christmas, everybody!